When talking about artificial intelligence, what most people think is ChatGPT helping us to complete some tasks, robots, biometric systems, and probably a couple of tools for automatizing our daily work. At GLF Africa, conversations focused on ways to train AI models with agricultural data from Africa, and on our GLF Live about AI, we explored some of the opportunities for this continent as well as the challenges problems that come when using this technology that grows and moves fast. This year, tech innovation is gaining even more momentum, which includes artificial intelligence, of course. And to discuss this, we have invited Isaac Rutenberg, intellectual property advisor at CIFOR-ICRAF and associate professor of ICT policy and innovation at Strathmore University. Isaac, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
First, I would love to start by asking you, what advancement have we seen in artificial intelligence applications specifically for agriculture, and how are they addressing certain issues like food security or even improving yields?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And I'll answer a little bit looking back to 2024 and also very much looking forward to 2025. So, of course, as you've mentioned, there's generative AI tools that people are using. And in the agricultural context, that is certainly very present. There are people using it for a variety of reasons, everything from, in our field, proposal writing and paper writing and paper summarizing to chatbot kind of advisory services for people, smallholder farmers maybe. And in addition to that, of course, there's the other aspect of artificial intelligence, which is more of the analysis of data and tools that allow the identification of trends, predictive models, and those are particularly useful in the agriculture space because we use a lot of very complicated data sets. Agriculture is, of course, the confluence of many different factors, from environmental factors, but also market factors that affect what people want to or can grow and sell in a reasonable way. So with that much data, AI is naturally very beneficial. It's very difficult to really understand the entire situation without some sort of computer assistance, and AI has proven that in some contexts it can be quite efficient. So some of the things we're looking for to come in the future or are even present now to some degree, I would point to particularly in food security the analysis of the availability of particular crops and the suitability, I should say, of particular crops for particular situations, predicting based on weather patterns and expected weather, expected market forces, market rates, market parts of the market that might influence what crops to grow. I think that is something that will be increasing over the course of the next years. And one perhaps area might be the reduction and losses of food loss in value chains and market chains. So there's quite a lot of the produce and agricultural outputs that we produce, particularly in Africa, are lost in the chain from the farm to the table. So I think there's a push to allow or to apply AI tools to that sort of situation too, and I think we'll see a lot of that in the coming years.
So we're seeing there's a lot of opportunities in the fields of food security, reduction of food loss, and market chains for 2025 and over the next decades, which is particularly positive in the context of these imbalances in the climate and the impacts that it has also on agriculture, which is great, I think. In this field, you mentioned, Isaac, that the major potential or the major benefits of AI is for because of the amount of data that agriculture has. And you mentioned generative AI. What is exactly generative AI? What's the difference between the others? Artificial intelligence, if I can call it in that way, that exists out there. Like, how can we land that, and how can we understand it?
Yeah, so generative AI, I think everyone is pretty familiar with that in the context of ChatGPT and other similar tools. It uses algorithms to predict basically to build output, predicting the next each next output piece in small doses, small chunks. So if you ask it a question, it will parse out the question that you've asked it, and then it will generate an answer based on probabilities from all of the data that it has ingested to be trained on, and the way that they built the algorithm, of course, affects how that output will be, or particularly the data that was used and the application of different weightings and different variables. So basically, at a very obvious, a very user-friendly level, we understand that we've all used ChatGPT in various contexts, and you can do that you can ask it, what are the best crops to plant in this and this location, and it'll give you an answer. Whether that answer is really great or not is certainly something that needs to be investigated, but in any particular case, but you can get answers from these tools. So that's probably the part of AI that most everybody is familiar with and understands. But of course, as I mentioned, there are many different other types of AI, and the one that we use most probably in at least in our work is data analysis tools. AI can take a large set of data that doesn't necessarily, it's not easy to analyze in any other way, and can identify patterns. It's very good at identifying patterns in that data, and that can be applied in a lot of different contexts. Everything from weather patterns, of course, drought patterns, so drought and rainfall. You can think of, for example, the analysis of data sets of tree rings, or in terms of remote sensing data, looking at the coverage of trees in different areas and how it changes over time. And now that we're getting data sets that are very detailed in terms of remote sensing, that is something that's being more and more applied throughout the industry.
And with all of these opportunities and different uses that AI can have in different fields, including to identify patterns in weather and rainfall, in the field of remote sensing as well, and the analysis of data sets. There has been also quite a few discussions around the fact that technology, specifically artificial intelligence, is changing faster than regulators can keep up. And that in the field of governance, in the field of knowing what are the possible challenges that we have in terms of regulating AI, brings a new layer of challenge, and brings a new layer of how can countries, states, how can society overall can use these tools without being negatively impacted in terms of governance and public participation as well, if to some extent. So how can we bridge that gap? How can we bridge the gap between regulators and technology improvements?
Yeah, so I would look at that from two perspectives. One is, I would actually disagree with the fundamental assumption that or premise that regulation doesn't keep up with technology. I mean, of course, right? Like regulators regulate what they know, but a lot of laws and regulations are general enough to be applied to new technologies as they're being developed. For example, data protection predates the rise of artificial intelligence by quite a bit. There has been data protection law and regulations in certain sectors such as banking and health for a very long time. And applying that to artificial intelligence is not a really big stretch. And it's something that is certainly possible and done by courts and done by those who need to apply the law can certainly do that. So I don't think that there's necessarily it's not always true that we just the regulators are completely too far behind. So now there are in other situations where new technologies enable things that just simply weren't possible at all previously, then it may sometimes be necessary to observe how those technologies are impacting citizens and those who don't have power to protect themselves against potential harms. Certainly, it's worth regulators looking at those sorts of situations and saying how can we improve the situation through law and regulation. It's very unusual or probably unwise to try and predict and do that predictively because it's just too difficult to predict. I don't think anyone really could have foreseen some of the rise in AI and the rapidity with which it's been deployed in a lot of different areas. And so the impacts are something you oftentimes, I mean, some of them are pretty obvious and some of them are something you could certainly predict and take care of in advance. But I think that that's certainly not always the case. And so, what I always advocate for is just vigilance, like on the part of regulators, and in particular, not to say that we're going to do one law and that's going to be all we need to do, and it's going to solve all the problems of AI. We're just going to have one go at this, and that's all that we need to do. That's never going to be the case. So I think that what we need to do is encourage regulators and lawmakers to continue to revisit the issues, although that can be difficult because they have their attention is drawn in many different directions, and oftentimes you may get only one crack at implementing or creating regulations. So I know that this is a difficult thing to do, but I think to the extent possible, we need to continue to educate the regulators that there are these new emerging harms or these new emerging issues that really do need to be looked at. But don't overwhelm them by saying like you're way behind. There's all these problems that just we have nothing to handle the issues with. That's generally not true, and I think that clever lawyers especially can always find some sort of law to apply when there's a need, but well, in many cases, and then of course it's up to the courts to interpret laws that may have been developed years before the actual harm comes out. So I think it's but in general though, I think it's just a matter of continually engaging with regulators and lawmakers and doing it in a way that is very friendly and trying to say we're trying to assist in doing this. It's as opposed to being an adversarial relationship.
It's very interesting that what you mentioned there around this assumption that regulation doesn't keep up with tech, and that is quite not true, or that can lead to some sort of confusion. And especially when we are talking about how privacy information is being handled by artificial intelligence and the generated systems that we are using. Especially when we are thinking in terms that this is being applied in different fields. So it will be pretty hard to have specific laws or normatives around specific tools and then trying to move around and to keep up with that. So in general terms, we already have the general framework, at least in terms of how to handle this. And there are other challenges that you also mentioned that could be to see how these technologies are impacting. And one of them are, or at least the ones that we wanted to discuss as well, is the environmental impacts of artificial intelligence. We now know that often relate this with water consumption. We know that data centers, that storages and processes all of this information consumes a lot of water to keep their systems working pretty much. Now we know this water consumption is higher, but when thinking on possible impacts of artificial intelligence applied in the field of agriculture, landscape restoration, do we have the same environmental impacts or concerns, or are there others more related to these specific issues that policymakers and people that are using these tools should be paying a little bit more of attention?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very complicated situation, I would say, because like these tools, and I mean, okay, so general purpose AI tools, of course, are being developed for a lot of different applications, not just agriculture, and in fact, agriculture is for most of these companies has been traditionally less interest. It wasn't, no one went and created ChatGPT because we didn't understand what to plant, right? What farming, like they needed a farming tool or something like that. That's not why they developed it, but it applies, right? So I think that the agriculture industry is really a subset and in some cases a small subset of the applications of artificial intelligence. I think that there are areas such as pharmaceuticals and banking where this is a lot more active in terms of development of bespoke solutions, artificial intelligence solutions. And those when you do that, of course, that increases the use of resources, the electricity uses, electricity, data, water, as you said, all of that. So is that something that has been a major problem in terms of agriculture and in my opinion, not so much. I think that there's growing interest in applying AI tools to agriculture. So of course it's becoming more of an issue. But also I would also add that these are actually policy decisions that are being made or not made in terms of allowing companies that build AI tools that are very resource intensive, allowing them access to electricity, to water resources, and to land. Some of these I guess you could say data centers are actually taking up land space, which could be used for other purposes, but definitely using natural resources. And so it's our decision, meaning as a society, to encourage those things or not encourage those things, right? So if a company training an AI model uses a lot of electricity and during the training of that model, what is the impact on the electricity grid? What is the use? What is the impact overall to the environment if we continue to do that over and over again? Those are certainly impactful things that we're doing, and I think the question really is, do the regulators understand? And most cases they do, and in most cases these are private sector companies that are building these models, and so they there's always in situations where we are trying to encourage private sector activities, in other words, capitalism, there is a great pressure to continue to allow for that sort of growth. And that growth comes with environmental impacts, for sure.
So maybe this is the field in which regulators are not keeping up, not because they don't know, but maybe because there are other incentives to not keep up with these impacts that AI can have overall by just existing itself and keep developing, and not in a specific field such as agriculture or landscape restoration, which is always going to be impacted by our environmental regulations.
Yeah, and I would say it's not that we can't keep up, it's that we're choosing not to, right? These are decisions that are actually being made where, for example, you could be very progressive and say, we're going to have higher taxes on electricity, a progressive tax on electricity, that the more and more you use, the more and more you pay the tax level goes up and up and up. And that, of course, would affect these kind of projects. But we don't do that in those cases.
Wonderful, Isaac. And when discussing artificial intelligence, we also have to keep attention. You mentioned that it's mostly being developed by the private sector, and there are other incentives around there and behind it to keep developing and growing AI and its market as well. When we think about developing AI, certain people also relate that to these global north countries, richer countries, and now we are seeing applications in the global south. We have examples in Africa, we already discussed about that. I'm from Latin America. There are some other examples in here as well. Do we have developers in our part of the world working in the field of AI? Are we driven innovation as well, or are we only taking the technology that others have developed to apply it on our fields or on our regions?
Yeah, thank you for that excellent question. So we do, in fact, have a lot of developers in the global south. Let me just kind of sort of generalize into the global south, which is always dangerous to do, but we certainly do. There are many different programs throughout Africa in the university level, within the private sector, I guess. I don't know if I would call them programs, but activities that support and drive the industry. And I think these generally don't get very much recognition, but they are there. Most universities, I would say, have an IT department, and a lot of them that I know of are at least have some focus on developing AI tools and expertise within the industry. And so I think perhaps the challenge is around data, where we sort of have a real challenge is around data. So a lot of AI tools are open source and provided by the likes of Google and IBM, et cetera. And so access to the tools is not really a challenge, but access to the data sets that create good AI systems, that is more of a challenge in the global south context. So, if you want really high quality Earth observation data, for example, of course, there's free data from the likes of NASA, but the resolution of that data is not the greatest. And so if you want really high resolution data to do whatever it is you're doing, you have to pay for it. And that's oftentimes out of reach for people in the global south, developers in the global south. So that's one example. We have relatively limited, it's not non-existent, but it's certainly less common or voluminous in terms of data acquisition sources. Scientific weather stations, for example, we tend to have fewer of them than in the global north. So getting those data sets, getting access to those data sets is challenging, and that can hinder some of the efforts. But on the other hand, it does kind of incentivize people to learn how to use smaller data sets and develop AI tools with limited resources. So, the early days of AI, everybody assumed the answer is always going to be throw as much data as you can possibly get at the AI training at the training step, and that works, but maybe it's not always the best answer. And so maybe we should learn how to use small data sets to train more targeted AI systems. And in fact, African programmers that I engage with are very good at that. And of course, they're good at that because they have to be good at that. Our data sets may tend to be smaller, but nevertheless, I think it's an area actually where I would even say we're pioneering to some degree in the development of the field. So certainly challenges, but also opportunities.
Definitely, it's great to hear that not only that we have great minds working and developing their own AI tools and learning also how to work around these challenges and how to overcome it, which would be very great for for developing these opportunities and these tools in the global south, in the global majority, and also in fields that maybe are not quite a priority for other regions as well, which is wonderful to hear and to learn as well. That's why I was kind of interested in knowing how are we seeing that sort of technology transfer or knowledge transfer that we're doing between global south, global north, and the developing of these tools as well. Isaac, thank you for these insights. I want to close or wrap up with you by asking, we already explored a little bit what to expect in 2025 in certain markets and in AI applications. What can we be paying attention to this year to not only learn more about artificial intelligence, but to understand how is it being applied in the fields of climate governance or agriculture, landscape restoration, specifically in the global south, and if there's any heads up that you want to give to our audience as well.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time because the sector is really at an incredible rate of growth right now, and I think one of the things that I'm just really fascinated by and really interested in is seeing where AI pops up where you may not have expected it, or which sometimes is really great and sometimes is kind of like questionable and ethically, perhaps even certainly economically. AI doesn't have to be the answer to every problem, and economically it may not make sense to always try and apply it there. So I think a lot of times people might be looking towards it when maybe it isn't the right approach. But nevertheless, I think what I'm really interested in watching over the course of the next year or two or three is just novel uses, new applications where it finds really good application. What I'm also really hopeful is to see is a greater discussion, though, in how we can make that development more fair to everybody. In particular, there's a growing divide between the global north and global south, as we've just discussed. Although there is a lot of activity in the global south, of course, the biggest activity is still by far in the global north. And so, these conversations certainly are being driven from there, and tech companies are forging ahead, sometimes at a pace that even they find like is uncontrollable or unsustainable. And so, there was a movement now a couple of years ago for a pause, a quote unquote pause at AI development. There was thousands of scientists signed a letter saying we should pause, but of course that never happened because there's no, no one is really controlling how this is evolving. So, and because of that, also, I think that there's some real socioeconomic challenges that are not getting better. And I would say I'm hopeful that those conversations will become louder, that we will actually come up with some real solutions that are some workable solutions, which will involve policy, which will involve technology. Those are the sorts of things that I'm cautiously optimistic, but also very interested to follow. And I hope that you are also.
It's going to be an interesting year for artificial intelligence and tech innovation in general. But as Isaac mentioned, even though AI is a great tool and can have a lot of applications in different fields and themes, it's not always economically or resourceful, useful, or even is not the ultimate solutions for all of our problems or all of our challenges, which is why we have to pay close attention to what are companies, governments, and civil society in general doing with AI, and how can we also be informed around this topic. Isaac, once again, thank you for joining us. And for all of you that want to learn a little bit more about artificial intelligence, I invite you to take a look at our Things Landscape platform. We have a lot of articles there around it. And also we have a whole event about GLF Africa that we discuss the topics of artificial intelligence in this and even more other applications and uses as well. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week. And don't forget to share with us any theme that you would like to see as part of our GLF Live this year. Until the next time, bye.